Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how both Labour and the Conservatives have been hinting at the expectation of a spring election in the coming year. An expectation that the Tories would do well to avoid unless they're serious. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, a few days before election year to go, and there's a lot of interest, of course, in when it's going to be. In theory, Sunak could call it at any time. In theory, it could be in 2025, but it's not going to be. The two most likely times would be May the 2nd or sometime in autumn. An autumn date, much more flexible, could be end of October, could be November. If Sunak were to call the election for spring, really it ought to be May the 2nd or earlier, but it couldn't be later. Because if it is, he risks another punishing local election campaign for no gain. What is the point in holding it in, say, June or July? You may as well hold it on May the 2nd and stop that beating. You know, I've said for quite a lot of the time, the spring election is way better for them than autumn. That's because in autumn, the Tories are going to have all the same problems as in spring, but some extra ones as well. And to balance it out, what can they say might be better in autumn than spring? Lower inflation figure. But that's not going to do enough. It's not going to make people feel that they're better off because they're not going to be better off. And the Tories must know that. Also, the government announced this week that the budget statement would be on March the 6th. Now, budget statements are in March because they have to come into effect in April, but they tend not to be quite that early. For example, this year it was on March the 15th. Last year it was March the 23rd, although it was the first week of March in 2021. So it's not as rare as hen's teeth. You wouldn't be ultra suspicious of a week 1 in March budget. But given that the spring budget is expected to include a lot of nice sounding but unfunded tax cuts in line with the direction the autumn budget was signalling, you wouldn't think the government would relish announcing the budget earlier than strictly necessary. Unless, of course, you wanted to generate a few weeks of feel-good factor about all the tax cuts, gauge the impression amongst the public, then have the election before people work out that actually it comes at a cost to the economy and public services. Of course, it doesn't mean the Tories are committing to a spring election, just that they're giving themselves the opportunity to go for it. As far as I can tell, Tory thinking is working like this. Announce lots of lovely tax cuts, get the public to think that things are looking up and they shouldn't queer the deal by changing government just when things are improving, then hold the election. I don't think that many of them think it will win them the election, just that it will lessen the damage. Labour similarly are also giving the impression that they expect a spring election. Starmer's ordered his senior leadership team to finalise their manifesto policies for final consideration for February so that they can be ready with the manifesto for spring. According to reports, Labour are also saying that everything the Tories doing points to a spring election. Now, I think there's probably a bit of political gamesmanship going on there. I would say if you look at what the Tories are doing, it points at giving themselves the option of a May election, and if it doesn't work out, going for autumn. For example, this March the 6th budget, look at it in a bit more detail. So if the Tories want to hold the election on May the 2nd, the same day as the local and mayoral elections, in order to avoid wiping out even more of their local government representation. Bear in mind, in a local election, there's a lot of people who are going to vote against the Conservatives to send them a message. Whereas if it's happening on the same day as the general election, they don't have to do that. If they're actually happy with their local mayor or their local council, they can still vote Conservative in that and against the Conservatives in the general election. So the Tories will do their local representatives a favour by having the general election on May the 2nd or before, right? But in order to do that, Parliament would have to be dissolved no later than March the 28th, which means Sunak would have to call the election that week. He'd probably have to do it a day or two before, realistically. So you reveal the budget on March the 6th. That gives you 3 weeks to gauge public opinion and make your mind up. If the public look favourably on it and you think, right, yeah, we can go for May, then you can call it. You've got 3 weeks to do that. If not, you can wait until autumn and hope that a miracle happens. If they were really gunning for May the 2nd, if they were going, yeah, we're going to have the election on May 2nd, just shh, they wouldn't need to announce their budget so early. In fact, actually, the sooner the election is after the budget, which finds favour with the public, the better. So if they were really determined to go for May, they wouldn't be doing that early budget. They'd be doing the budget in a couple of weeks later or a week later in mid-March. So that suggests to me the Tories want to test the water. They want to announce the budget early. They want to give themselves time to gauge public reaction and then make their final decision based on that public reaction. However, I can see how it suits Labour to suggest the Tories are strongly indicating a spring election. First of all, it helps galvanise their support. They are currently falling behind on the Tories on donations again. Last year, they outstripped them. This year, it's not going so well. Admittedly, the Tories did get 10 million quid in a will. But Labour have gone into overdrive trying to correct that. An imminent election works very well for fundraising. It also helps that MPs focus on the task at hand. The same would work for the Tories as well. A lower chance of rebellions if an election is sooner rather than later. But finally, if the public are persuaded that a spring election is coming, and then it doesn't, it makes the Tories look like they're clinging on to power. Labour can then characterise Sunak as a squatter prime minister. We were all expecting summer, or a spring election rather. It was supposed to be May. We usually have it in May, give or take. What's going on here? People can understand that we had the last election in December. It was unusual circumstances. We had a hung parliament. Parliament was deadlocked. It couldn't get anything done. General election to unlock it all. People went along with that. Why wouldn't we have the general election at the usual time of May, give or take a few weeks? Oh, it's because Rishi Sunak's clinging to power. In fact, it would be a problem for the Conservatives to allow the public to think that a spring election is likely and then hold on for autumn. A time of year when those shiny tax cuts, which won't actually help ordinary people, are a distant memory. And the new NHS winter crisis is brewing at the time of year when many people's new tradition of choosing between heating and eating begins. In fact, it makes no difference what election timing Tory actions are pointing to. Labour would want to say it points to spring regardless. For the Tories, tricky. Should be obvious to them that spring is better than autumn. However, if Sunak calls the election for spring and the polls are in the same shocking state they are now, won't his MPs go, well, why don't we wait and see if something happens over summer? He can hardly turn around and tell them, no, because it's going to be way worse in autumn. Because that would be an admission that he is incapable of governing, that events are out of his control. In which case, why did they make him leader? Whereas if he calls the election in autumn when the polls are in a shocking state, they'll understand, well, there's no further time. In theory, you could do it in winter, but his MPs will know that that would be madness. In addition, and this for me is what could tip it, there's now a credible chance that we're entering technical recession. It's hard to say at the moment, but if so, is Sunak really going to call an election when we're officially declared in recession? And if our economy shrinks this quarter, because we now know it's shrunk in quarter 3. So if it shrinks in this quarter, and we won't find out just yet, but if it does, we can't possibly get the all clear until late April. But if Sunak wants that May 2nd election, he has to call it in March. So I think there are definitely factors which could bounce the Tories into an autumn election, even if it ends up being worse for them. The way I look at it is this. May is probably better for the Tories than autumn. Waiting longer just gives, at the very least, Reform UK more time to work on their election strategy. I think everyone else is sort of set. It gives Labour another season of local elections to cement the idea that the country is winding up to change the government. However, any Tory MPs who abandon the notion that they're going to win the election on their own personal seat, whichever is more important to them, which is more important to them, their seat or their party in power, whichever it is, if they think that that's gone regardless, they may just think, well, can we just have a few more months to swindle a bit more money? And despite all of this talk of a spring election, I am now finding more reasons to be a little bit more doubtful. I still think it's more likely than autumn, but that is mostly based on the fact I'm assuming Tories can see that it's better to be spring than autumn. But I think I would have to think about it again, depending on what the growth figures for this final quarter end up being. Because if it's negative, we're in technical recession and then the game changes. I know the Tories have made a lot of political missteps, especially under Rishi Sunak, but can you really imagine them going, yeah, we should call an election when we're in recession, when they don't strictly have to? But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.